Hi everyone. In this video, we are going to introduce the basic ideas behind hypothesis testing. We'll learn what a hypothesis test is, the difference between the null and alternative hypotheses, and how to identify the type of hypothesis test. Once you understand these ideas, writing hypotheses in the next video will be much easier. Let's begin. A hypothesis is a statement about a population parameter that we want to test using sample data. A hypothesis test uses sample data to determine whether there is enough evidence to support a claim about a population. Notice that we are making a conclusion about the population, even though we only collect data from a sample. Before we continue, let's quickly review the difference between a population and a sample. A population is the entire group we're interested in studying. A sample is a smaller group selected from that population. Population values are called parameters, while sample values are called statistics. For example, the population mean is mu, while the sample mean is x bar. The population proportion is p, while the sample proportion is p hat. Here's one important rule to remember. Hypotheses are always written about population parameters, never sample statistics. That means you always write hypotheses using symbols like mu, p, or sigma, not x bar or p hat. Every hypothesis test has two hypotheses. The first is the null hypothesis, written as H naught. The null hypothesis is a statement we assume is true unless there's enough evidence against it. It usually represents no change, no difference, or the current claim. The second is the alternative hypothesis, written as HA or H1. The alternative hypothesis is a statement we are trying to find evidence to support. It usually represents a change, difference, increase, or decrease. The most important rule is the equality rule. The null hypothesis always contains an equality, such as equals, less than or equal to, or greater than or equal to. The alternative hypothesis never contains an equality. It uses only greater than, less than, or not equal to. If you are ever unsure where the equal sign goes, remember this simple rule. The equal sign always belongs in H naught. Let's review. H naught is the statement we begin by assuming is true. HA is the statement we're trying to support. The equal sign always belongs in H naught. There are the most important rules you use throughout this chapter. Let's look at a few common claim words you see in hypothesis testing problems. You don't need to memorize the entire table, but recognizing these patterns will make writing hypotheses much easier. If a claim says greater than or increased, the alternative hypothesis uses greater than symbol. If the claim says less than or decreased, the alternative hypothesis uses the less than symbol. If the claim says different from or not equal to, the alternative hypothesis uses the not equal to symbol. On the other hand, phrases like at least, at most, or exactly all included an equal sign So they belong in the null hypothesis, not the alternative hypothesis. Don't worry about memorizing every phrases. As we work through examples in the next video, these patterns will become much more natural. Once you have written the alternative hypothesis, identifying the type of hypothesis test is easy. Always look at the alternative hypothesis. If HA uses a greater than symbol, it's a right tail test. If HA uses a less than symbol, it's a left tail test. If HA uses a not equal to symbol, it's a two-tailed test. A common mistake is looking at the null hypothesis instead. Remember, type of test is always determined by the alternative hypothesis.